Okay, we're live, Chair.
Okay. Right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Warwickshire Police and Crime Panel meeting on Thursday, the 19th of November. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guests and anybody that's watching this online. And please can all members just be aware that we are not only recording this meeting for records at County Council, but we're also broadcasting live on the internet. So usual good practice exists that when you are not speaking, please mute your microphone and be conscious that if your camera is running, that you will be being broadcast to the world, no less. So with no further ado, let me open up and let me do some chair's announcements before we start. First of all, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a new member of the panel and a prospective new member of the panel. So colleagues, if I can introduce you all to Chris Kettle. Chris Kettle is a Stratford District Councillor who joins the panel today for his first meeting. Chris, you are very welcome. Can I also introduce you all to Mr. Andrew Davis, who conveniently has written in brackets the new one. Andrew has the pleasure of being subject of agenda item number 4 on our agenda today, which is to consider Andrew Davis's appointment as our new independent member. Andrew, you're very welcome. And as we're appointing 2 members, that means that we are saying goodbye to 2 current members and colleagues. I'm very sorry to report that Councillor Sarah Wally-Hoggins from Stratford District Council has taken a decision to stand down from the panel. You, like me, will thank Sarah for all of her contribution, particularly around the veracity and the enthusiasm that she brought to championing the domestic violence agenda and issues around police performance, where particularly in terms of the performance group and Sarah's chairing of the performance group, I found Sarah to be a great asset to the panel. And I am genuinely very sorry to find that she has stepped down. But we wish Sarah well going forward, and I'm sure we'll see her again in the not too distant future. Now that also brings me on to Bob Malloy, Mr. Bob Malloy, who's been our independent panel member for some time. Well, I say some time. Nicola is going to pick up this issue. Nicola, can I hand over to you to say a few words in terms of Bob's significant contribution, and then we'll invite Bob to speak.
Well, I think as we all as panel members know, Bob is a very modest man, but today we're not going to spare his blushes, even though it might be down a video screen. In the 7 years that I've been on the panel, Bob has been a consistent, experienced and very wise head, and I certainly as a member learnt a huge amount from Bob. He's brought with him to that role his professional experience in education and youth work, his knowledge of the justice system as a magistrate, and great insight into the way the probation service works, all of which has strongly informed the quality of the contribution he's made to this panel. I've always felt that Bob speaks with great humanity and integrity and with a really clear understanding about what our role in that scrutiny picture is. He did a brilliant job as the chair of the Planning and Performance Working Group, and it was a pleasure to serve with him on that group and learn from him. And he's also made a very big contribution chairing 2 of our task and finish groups, victim services and also on substance misuse. And I think he led the panel into an approach that took a deeper and more intensive look into really serious and fundamental issues, which I hope has delivered outcomes that the commissioners have felt have been helpful and useful to them in terms of delivering their roles. So over that time as a member of the Police and Crime Panel, and before that as a member of the Police Authority, Bob's given a huge contribution to Warwickshire. Obviously, we know a lot of those contributions are not in the public domain. They happen quietly in meetings, they happen in scrutiny, but actually the impact of that, I think, has been really significant and I hope has benefited a lot of residents of Warwickshire and hopefully the Commissioner and a lot of the people that serve within the police force. So, Bob, it's been a pleasure to know you over these 7 years, and I hope we'll continue to know you and that our paths will cross, but it's been a real pleasure to have you on this panel and to learn from you. So thank you, Bob.
Bob, the quiet member of the panel that brings in sage observations and advice and brings experience. And obviously you prior to being a member of the Police and Crime Panel, you were a member of the Police Authority as well. So you certainly bring to us continuity. Bob, would you like to say a few words?
Chair Nicola, that's much too generous. You're very kind and really don't deserve it.
I'm very pleased that I can't get my camera to work, because I would be sharing my blushes with you. It's been a wonderful experience for me. It's been 10 years now, and during that time I've developed an enormous respect for the police, who I didn't know too much about in Warwickshire before I started. I found it a very positive experience working with the Commissioner in his office. Can I particularly thank Neil Hewson and David Patterson? Nicola referred to our work on the Performance and Planning Group, and they really have epitomised the Commissioner's office in being very open, transparent and very supportive of us. And that's been it's been a wonderful experience for me. And also colleagues on the panel, yourself, David, and Nicola, and everyone else who I've known over the years. It's been a great pleasure, and I really don't deserve your praise, but thank you all very much, and I wish the police, the Commissioner's office and the panel the very best wishes for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now, let's just note as well that there is one more member of this group, Neil Hewson. Neil, am I right in thinking today is your final Police and Crime Panel meeting?
It is, Chair. It is today. Thank you.
And obviously, Neil, I know that we have all benefited from your experience and your advice and your guidance. And I certainly feel that you have done your role with the utmost of integrity, and obviously brought a clear professional capability to it, which has been clear to everybody. Would you like to take a couple of minutes just to address the panel, or are you happy to sit quietly and slide away?
Probably the latter, but I will. It's not been an easy decision to finish my career and my working life. It'll be 39 years serving the public in Warwickshire when I go in January, and I've tried my level best to do a good job, and I've tried to do the right thing all the way through my career, and I have always retained a really clear focus on why we're here, and it's for making things better for the public we serve. So part of that has been my relationship with the panel, and it's been an interesting experience over the last seven or 8 years. I think the relationship currently under the present Commissioner is really positive, and I think we've gone from strength to strength, and I do feel that the Commissioner's office has a role to assist the panel in discharging their functions without interfering with it. So over the years I've tried to be pretty clear in what I think the key issues the panel perhaps need to focus on, and almost without exception that kind of guidance and advice has been taken on board by the panel, which is very reassuring. And I think the general relationship with the panel during the fallout of the alliance was critical, because it was a difficult place for us all at that point. And one would argue that actually the current situation in terms of the pandemic and the financial challenges we face, we're going to need the support of the panel through this as well, because this isn't going to be easy. So on a personal level, I know most of you quite well, and I thank you for your patience with my sometimes grumpy approach, but it's all done in the right spirit, and I've really enjoyed working with the panel. I think the accountability that the panel brings is critical, and we're all still learning this. There is no guide as to how you do this job. It's very much doing the right thing at the right time, and sometimes we don't quite get it right, but generally I think in the county we've got it spot on most of the time. So thank you, Chair, for the acknowledgement. This is my last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And clearly your embarrassment isn't saved yet, because I can see that Councillor Derek Poole would like to make a statement. Derek?
Thank you, Chair. It's addressed to Neil. As an ex-police officer sitting on the panel, I've sat with you for the last 7 years, and sometimes I've asked questions and I've always got a straight and direct answer from you, which I do find positive. You are not grumpy, but placid at times. But I thank you for your valuable information and help. And good luck on whatever you do in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Derek. And obviously, Neil, the whole panel sends their good wishes. And finally, while we're doing the introductions for members, I'll just point out that we are joined today by Mr. David Carter. Many of you will know David Carter as the previous Chief Executive of Warwickshire County Council. David joins this meeting today as a member of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee. And as you know, we regularly have a member attend each other's meetings today. So, David, you're very welcome. And so to the main item of business then. Do we have any apologies, please?
No apologies received in advance, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 2. Members, does anybody have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in any items on the agenda, please? No, that's none received, so we'll proceed with that. Colleagues, that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting on the 24th of September and also on the 9th of October. Can I please take those minutes for accuracy first? So can I take the 24th of September for accuracy, please? Andy Davis, I have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very small point on page 2 of the 24th of September. In the apologies for the meeting, it's myself who was apologising, so it's Andy Davis without an E. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, we're going to get used to that, no E and with E. So we note that. Colleagues, with that amendment, is everybody happy for me to sign those minutes as a true and accurate record? Thank you very much indeed.
Yes.
And can I take you to the minutes of the 9th of October 2020 again? Can we just please do those minutes for accuracy? Okay, that would be on the papers, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, and finally page 13 of the document pack. Colleagues, is everybody happy for me to sign those minutes as a true and accurate record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Deb, do we have any matters arising from those either set of minutes, please?
No, Chair. Any action points are being raised in the Police and Crime Commissioner's report or through the presentation that we have later on the agenda.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, I now propose to move on to public speaking, and we have the pleasure of being joined by Councillor Keith Condacore today. Keith has pre-submitted a couple of questions that he'd like to raise with the Commissioner. So, Keith, can I welcome you and hand the floor to you?
Thank you very much, Chair. There's two issues that have been sort of grumbling along for a while. One is about safety and speed limits. Clearly, we've had a reduction in road casualties with the lockdowns and less traffic, but that's coming back up. But we're continuously asking for lower speed limits, both around schools, on new housing estates, and on some of our roads that are now getting more developed with the new housing. And the pushback from some officers and some councillors is, well, the police wouldn't support that. And I've never actually heard that from the police, but it's quite often said that the police don't support reducing limits because it's more work for them to enforce. So I thought it was really useful to have some clarity because I am desperate to get 20-mile-an-hour limits around some of my schools and reduce some of the other limits on some of the faster roads like at the top of Higham Lane. The second point I wanted to raise, which is quite a local issue, is we've had, unfortunately, some large events when some of the travellers' communities have gone to a funeral and a wedding, and with people working so hard to obey the rules, that there has been a lot of tension because of these events that don't seem to have had any repercussions for the people breaking the rules, and sadly seems to have had repercussions for one of the priests involved, who really didn't seem to be able to do something about it. I'm a massive fan of actually supporting these communities and being fair with them, and it's very good to read your report, Philip, about looking after these communities. But we can't support and be friends of these communities if these communities then don't actually always keep to the same standards of everyone else. So I think these issues we've had have been important, and I'm trying to get everyone to obey the rules, which is why I think we can't have exceptions, be it Dominic Cummings or anyone else. We have to have a framework in which the rules. And it has been very unfortunate, these two events. And just finally, I've just read on some of the press about potential cuts to police backroom support, and I really don't want us to lose more experience from the police. It must take a decade to get experience in all these sort of back office jobs, investigating jobs, etc. And I was a bit concerned about hearing that some of these posts might be lost. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Commissioner, can I invite you to answer the questions about the Gypsy and Traveller community and also the speed limits? We will, as part of our pre-agenda discussions, pick up the staffing issues with you later on in the meeting. Commissioner.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody, and good to see your faces, if not in person. And by the way, I will be saying a few words towards the end of my presentation about my Chief Executive's retirement. So, Keith, speed limits. This, I think, has been an ongoing discussion between local councillors, the local authorities, the schools, developers, and of course the police. And this is something that I haven't raised with the force before, so thank you for putting it on the agenda. I will. In my view, these decisions are made by the Highway Authority, which is Warwickshire County Council, and you are a member. And I think there needs to be more joint working, with the police, with other agencies and the schools to try and put up a case for some of these speed limits to be initiated. And I'm not against speed limits, particularly outside schools and on new housing estates and the other examples you raised. So I will undertake to discuss that with the force and to see if we can get some more joint working to perhaps look at implementing some speed limits in specific areas. And I know that the area you represent is one of those areas that I think probably needs a close look at. Gypsy and Travellers, I have discussed this with the force over the last 4.5 years on many occasions. I think we as a force try to treat all minority groups fairly and reasonably, and I do think that Gypsies and Travellers come into that category. I'm well aware of the tensions that are often created by what we call the settled community when there is an unauthorised encampment. And of course, more recently, we have had weddings, funerals and other large social gatherings of Gypsies and Travellers in Warwickshire, specifically in Rugby and Nuneaton that I've been made aware of. I think the organisers of the funeral, who's often a parish priest or a vicar or whoever it might be, I think they've been pretty good at keeping to the rules, and they have changed, as you know, from 30 to 15, and may change again. So I think sort of internal indoor gatherings at these occasions have been reasonably well. They've abided with the rules. The problem comes when you get another 200, 300 people who just turn up into the area and loiter within the churchyard or the chapel or within the close environments of that. And to have that sort of number of people, if you like, as a group, and I accept that a lot of them don't do social distancing. They're not the only groups that don't do social distancing fairly regularly, but they do. I think for the police to enforce 200 to 300 people, we would need thousands of officers. And I think we're in a situation here where we need to understand the expectations of what the force can physically do at any one time. In my experience, and I've spoken to Mark Pawsey, MP for Rugby, and to Marcus Jones, that the police operations on these things have been proportionate, but have not been able to arrest 200 to 300 people at one go. We don't have the custody facilities. We just don't have the infrastructure to do that. So it's important, I think, that local authorities and those who run funerals, weddings, baptisms, and other occasions when there might be more than the turn up than is allowed under the rules. I think we need to talk locally. I think we need to look at possible highway diversions and other things which have gone on. So the answer to your question, Keith, is it's being worked on. We're talking with the Gypsy and Traveller community themselves. We are talking with local authorities and with local residents, and I will do my best to reduce the effect that these occasions may have on local residents. And yeah, it sounds as though we're going to get the third question raised later on, Chair.
Yes, Commissioner, we'll come back to that later. Thank you, as long as Keith doesn't mind. I do have Neil Hewson with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And for the information of the wider panel, just to add to Philip's comments around the Gypsy and Travellers incidents, I have spoken to the Gold Commander for all of those operations and the Silver Commander to get a view on the police response. But I think what's missing in the Commissioner's update to the panel is some clarity around what the police can and cannot do. And I've sought that clarity from people who are running the COVID response within the force. The reality is that each of those events have been properly organised and they have been limited to the numbers. So the organisers and the traveller community have tried to stick to the regulations. As Philip quite rightly points out, it's the additional people who turn up outside the venues who create the problem. I think the panel needs to be aware that the police only have powers to enforce the regulations, and the regulations relate to the number of people in the church, at the graveside, in the event. With regards to social distancing, the police have no powers to enforce social distancing. It's guidance. And as such, if we get 200 turn up outside, the police haven't got the powers to do anything about that. Yes, they can look at parking. Yes, they can give advice, but they can't actually start issuing fixed penalty tickets for that. So the only thing they can do, and Councillor Carnicore has already touched on, the parish priest. There was some action taken against the parish priest. I don't know why there was an action taken against the other organisers, but to be clear, the police have a limited role to play. And some of the people who are turning up to these events, as we all have experienced over the years, are aggressive, uncooperative, and actually don't take advice around social distancing either. But what the police have assured me is that they have maintained the regulatory numbers at the actual event itself, in the church, around the graveside, etc. So it is a difficult policing issue, and I don't think, from my research, the police are ducking this, but it isn't as clear cut as perhaps the public think. So if you see a big gathering, it's not the police's responsibility to do anything other than advise in relation to social distancing. I hope that kind of input gives some clarity as to their role. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Commissioner, we will return to this issue when we discuss our work plan later on and discuss with you options for the panel to support any work you're doing around that agenda, both for developing the work that you've previously done on the Gypsy and Traveller community, and also in terms of supporting your role and your position in terms of the coronavirus mitigation and enforcement measures. So when we come to agenda item number 6, we'll revisit these issues. Keith Condecourt, before we move on to main agenda item business, is that okay, or is there anything else that we need to consider?
I welcome the Commission's comments on schools. It'd be good to have a position note or just something out of his discussion on speed limits, just so actually we have the support of the police or not, and that's clarified. And I think it was the parish priest being charged and fined, which was a particular shock to some of the community. Thank you for your time anyway, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
And thank you for your question. Obviously, you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting should you want to. Colleagues, that concludes the first main agenda item. We now move on to agenda item number 2, which is report of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Philip, can I hand the floor to you?
Yeah, right, thank you. Thank you, David. I hope you've all had a chance to it's quite a lengthy, detailed report. I hope you've had a chance to read it, and no doubt I shall get some questions on it when I finish saying a few words. But it's been a really busy period, and I did want to update you on what's been happening in my world and the forces world since our last meeting in September. I want to say to thank the Chief Constable for attending your last meeting. He is not under any compulsion to do that, and he comes voluntarily, and I thought he gave a pretty open and frank assessment of where Warwickshire Police is, and I hope the panel appreciated that. So moving through the report, there are 1 or 2 actions which I think I need to respond to. The first one was about safer neighbourhood teams updating communities and elected members. I used to be an elected member. I always felt it my duty to find out who were my safer neighbourhood team members, and I thought at the time it wasn't as easy as it should be. So I understand why there was the question. But you'll see the response. The Police UK website is updated by the force regularly, and you can get members and details of safer neighbourhood teams, I think right across the country, but certainly in your own patches or neighbouring patches or whatever it might be you want. The second one was about student officer mentoring arrangements, absolutely a concern of mine. I mean, if we've recruited a net increase of over 200 officers, a number have left as well, we've probably recruited 300 plus new officers coming into the force, so a third of the force probably have less than 2 years experience. And of course, this is one of the downsides of going on a major recruiting campaign, as you do bring in raw recruits without the experience. But you'll see there are mentoring arrangements in place. It's plainly a duty of the Chief Constable to look after the health, well-being and ability of newer recruits and younger officers with less experience, to make sure that they are properly tutored and trained and protected in everything that they do. And you'll see there that there are 27 out of 45 tutors, 60% are now in the first 5 years of service. And of course, like any career, it changes. I'm very keen to ask the force and push them into doing some sort of continuing professional development. Policies change, the law changes, obviously equipment gets upgraded and changes. So I think that is something going forward which I'd like to see expanded. The golden hour response is plainly important. We're quite lucky in Warwickshire. We're fairly small geographically compared to some other police force areas, and plainly we're putting that response and the rationale behind it and put it into effect into all training programs. Everyone is tutored for 10 weeks exposed to multiple crimes, and certainly not expected to manage the golden hour principles on their own until they have really done some service. But there is always an assessor constable supporting them through that first period, and we expect all student officers to achieve the required level of competencies and they will then go off for independent patrol duties once that is agreed and through. So, in other words, I think it's important that new recruits are properly trained and are not exposed to some of the complicated situations until they've had the proper training to do that. But there's always help and more senior and experienced officers there to give guidance on the job. The annual report, it was a draft we presented last time. That's now been finalised, and that has gone out to our partners and the public and the communities of Warwickshire. And I'd like to thank Dave Patterson from my office at this stage for producing that report. It was very detailed. It was pretty open and transparent. And I think now our communities understand a bit more about Warwickshire Police for some of the work that he's been doing over the months. Establishment, always being asked about this wherever I go. You'll see there's that graph. We're currently running at 1,044 officers. Not very long ago, we were 792, so a significant increase in officers, which is one of the things that was hammered home to me when I was standing for election and when I was out on engagements. People wanted more officers able to do a warranted police officer's job in whatever part of the police. As you see, we're predicting the establishment. Well, we've got one more intake of officers coming up in the last quarter of this financial year, which will predicted establishment of 1,059 in April 2021. And of course, depending on the tranche of the 20,000 announced by the government Warwickshire receives, we still haven't got that figure yet. We are anticipating moving up to 1,100 or thereabouts by April 2022. So that is an ongoing recruitment and training regime, but we can't afford, and we won't be bringing in quite the numbers we brought in over the last year or two. But I think 1,100 will be the record number that Warwickshire's ever had. And I think the expanding population and the interest that everybody has in policing and what responses they get and all those other things I get asked at meetings, I think 1,100 is a realistic target to aim for within the next sort of 15 months. On to detective officers. Warwickshire was one of the first to launch the Detective Constable Degree Holder Entry Programme. I meant to meet them all on day one. Interestingly, quite a lot of them were delighted to be pushed into the detective side of policing. A lot of them wanted to do that. They came from all backgrounds, all parts of Warwickshire. But I just noticed that there was a keenness to get on. I am a supporter of the Degree Holder Entry Programme. I think it brings in a more mature and perhaps a more questioning type of officer, which is what Warwickshire Police need, and I think the public expect and deserve. So they were moving on, and once they've done their first 12 months, they will be going into CID, into serious and complex crime teams, which is where we are short, and the whole country is short of those sorts of detectives. So that's where they will go. So we're one of the first to do it, and obviously we're working very closely with the other forces in the West Midlands and Staffordshire University on the construct of the training and lessons learnt, and we'll be sharing that with the others. And we're working very closely with our neighbouring forces on this. Diversity, as you know, Inspector Faz Chisti is going to be giving us a presentation later on. Sorry, I've demoted him, Chief Inspector Faz Chisti, who has been leading the force on diversity, equality and inclusion matters for some time now. He will talk to us about positive action, which is an initiative within Warwickshire Police to look at some of these important issues. And it isn't just recruitment, it's about retention and progression of Black, Asian and minority ethnic police officers, and actually extends to all the other categories under the Equality Act. And there are many of those which we need to be inclusive and be able to join Warwickshire Police. So he will give us, I'm sure, knowing Faz, he will give us a pretty open and honest assessment of where we're at, and the panel specifically asked for that. So I'm pleased he's been able to join us today. So under the next part, those are the nine protected characteristics are important, and it isn't just Black, Asian. It's a much wider subject, and there are many more minorities and those with disabilities and dementia and other things across the county that we need to be taking into account. On the national awards, worth mentioning, Inspector Paul Barnsley, one of our officers, he's won a national award looking at mental health issues, learning differences, disabilities, neurodiversity and dementia. And I think these are all, police officers are not mental health nurses or experts on issues like learning difficulties, but more and more, I think victims and perpetrators do fall into some of these categories, and an officer needs to understand more about it and know where to get help if it's needed, and that this is all part of that. And also going on to look at children and young people's mental health, autism, and specific learning differences, which are really important for a police officer out on patrol to understand some of those differences in across our communities. Police performance, I no doubt there'll be some questions on this. We've highlighted some of the year-to-date trends. Pleased to see the majority of those, which people talk to me about violence with injury, personal robbery, burglary, residential, and vehicle offences. All those have reduced fairly significantly, which is really good to see. Part of that will be because of the lockdowns and the pandemic, but we do, I'm really pleased there's been a total recorded reduction of 8% so far. The two figures that stand out as being not so good are violence with injury. This includes quite a bit of domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, those type of incidents and often crimes. And of course, there are malicious communications on social media, we all know, and have been, probably most of us have been recipients of some of that. And that is a scourge on society, and is one of the real downsides of social media, although social media has a lot of upsides to it. The other category that stand out in drug offences, I think a lot of that is due to more proactivity from the force. During lockdown, they were able to do a lot of work about enforcing drug laws. A lot of people were arrested, charged, and subsequently found guilty, and it's been helpful. One of the very few ways that the lockdown has been helpful is being able to identify drug dealers and drug users on our streets, in our villages, and I think there's been quite a lot of extra resource put into that, which has been part of the reason that drug offences have gone up by 66%, which is a large amount. Having said that, it's still gone up. That's not good. So there's plenty of work to be done on that, and we're working very closely with other forces on county lines and other drug supply routes to try and stop them coming into Warwickshire in the first place. On the holding to account side, we've instituted this new deep dive every month. That's been really helpful. You'll see there's a complete cross-section of items there we've gone into and asked questions. It's all minuted and available to the public, and we very much welcome questions from the public and elected representatives on any matter that I can raise with the force. And some of these items a lot in that list were definitely raised by the public. Roads policing, certainly one of them. Victims, investigations, serious and organised crime have all been raised on many occasions with me. And we were able to go into quite a lot of detail as to what the force were doing about these various issues, and able to put across my view as to how important all of those items are for the safety here in Warwickshire. HMIC FRS, you all know, help me in a way to hold the force to account. They produce reports every now and again, I was really pleased that in 1920 the force was graded good in effectiveness, which was an improvement. They did have the cause for concern about investigations, and that's one of the reasons why that course I talked about, the Detective Constable degree holder course, was trying to target resources into investigations. There is this national shortage, and it's difficult. We've also looked at about this the service improvement team and other matters with HMIC FRS. We are awaiting another inspection in November this month, and I do await their findings with interest, but we have a high degree of optimism that things have improved, but we'll wait and see what the Independent Inspectorate says about that. Harper's Law I did want to raise. This is a national campaign which I'm part of and have signed up to. This is about those responsible for a death or a death on this occasion of any emergency service worker, especially police officers who put themselves into danger, to upgrade the penalty for manslaughter to a life sentence. I'm very keen on this. I absolutely think it's just not acceptable for a police officer, a firefighter, or a paramedic to be suffering abuse, certainly verbal or physical, and indeed the final sacrifice that some of them have made over recent years. And as we all saw in the PC Andrew Harper case, the perpetrators of that awful crime, I think, got off with a pretty light and lenient sentence, but in accordance with the law. So the law needs changing. So I'm working, actually, everybody seems to be on with this, the Home Secretary, the Policing Minister, the Shadow Home Secretary and Shadow Policing Minister, and a lot of people across the country are in support of this, and we want to see it through legislation as soon as possible, and I'm plainly working with our members of Parliament to enable that to happen. Just on the OPCC, I'm going to say a few words about my Chief Executive at the end, but I'm working pretty well, under some pressure at the moment. There's a lot on. We're getting more and more requests from the Home Office and other bodies like the Ministry of Justice to keep putting in statistics and our views and requests for funding, which we sometimes but don't always get. There's a huge amount of work, in my view, since I became PCC 4 years ago, and the office has worked really well. It has worked hard. Working from home, I don't believe, has reduced productivity at all, and I think many public services are saying that. The office is now closed at the moment during lockdown, but the output and the productivity of the office, I think, has been exemplary, and a lot of that is down to Neil Hewison organising and encouraging members of staff. Moving on, there's a review of the MASH going on. Those of you who are county councillors will know that the MASH is a multi-agency hub. It's sort of partnership with the County Council, Social Services, Warwickshire Police and the National Health Service. Like all these things, I think it needs to get down, test and adjust. For those of you with military experience will know what I mean. And it needs to, I think, just to have a review to see if we can improve the effectiveness of the MASH. It's getting busier and busier. Has it got the right number of resources? Is it structured correctly? Are all the partners putting everything they should into it, etc., etc.? So we were signatories to the original memorandum of understanding to set up the MASH in 2016, and of course one of the points in that memorandum was that it should ensure continuous improvement going along. So it's not too early for a review. We've facilitated various meetings between senior managers, and Richard Long from my office has been handling that, and there will be a report back by the end of the year. We'll see what it says and act on it. Gypsy Roman Travellers, just had a good meeting, positive meeting with Mark Pawsey, the MP for Rugby, particularly about I think there's sort of permanent sites expanding in the Bulkington and Barnacle areas on the edge of Nuneaton, where there's been considerable expansion of traveller communities, often without planning consent, and often just done, and considerable concern with the local communities at what's going on, which has led to alleged criminal and antisocial behaviour. So quite rightly, that was pointed out to us. We had a meeting with a number of senior officers, a number of partners, including the Housing Authority, and which is Nuneaton Bedworth Borough. We had the Parish Council there. We had some members of the public, and a really good discussion as to how we can take this sort of problem head on, and to see what we can do about it. I think we came to the conclusion that one of the issues is planning. One of the issues is housing. There needs to be a provision of suitable land for traveller occupation throughout Warwickshire. And we need to work closely with all the local authorities, principally the planning authorities, to address this issue, which isn't just applicable in Warwickshire. It is a national issue. What we've asked the police to do is to review some of the patrol strategies and local engagements. Safer neighbourhood teams need to understand not only the sites but the local residents to those sites. Martin Rowan Clark, who I think some of you will know, is our tactical advisor, does a lot of liaising with the travelling community. And those who have been on for some time, you remember we set up the unauthorised encampment protocol, which I think in essence is working. And there is now, it would appear that agencies are working closer together to be able to get orders from court quicker. Hasn't been helped, incidentally, by the movement of all the magistrates' courts of Warwickshire into Coventry, but they have been doing that as these things go. And plainly, my intention is to make sure that the travellers on permanent sites abide by the planning laws, abide by the laws, and indeed become part of the local community. It doesn't always happen. I think that would be the ideal. And I want to make sure that that the enforcement of any transgressing of the law, be it a crime or antisocial behaviour, is enforced by the force. And I've spoken to the new member of the panel, Chris Kettle, on this a number of occasions, and no doubt he may raise it today. So moving on to criminal justice, this has been quite a challenge to all the agencies in the criminal justice system. The Ministry of Justice is doing its best to push the number of court cases being held in Warwickshire and indeed other local areas to the maximum. A lot of work has gone on to try and make court rooms and courthouses so COVID secure. It's quite difficult when you think there are judges, there are clerks, there are obviously there are victims and witnesses. There is the alleged perpetrator. There are jury teams, and it's quite difficult to socially distance with all these amount of people. And the bigger the trial, the more there are of them, and the sort of some of these are taking up more than one court building. So a number of areas in the country, there have been porter cabins. There's a lot of work has gone on to try and reduce that backlog in the court, in the criminal justice system. Magistrates are beginning to they're now discharging more cases than are coming in. So I think it's fair to say that the backlog in magistrates' courts is reducing. It's not so easy within the Crown Courts and the big criminal trials, but major efforts are being made by the judiciary, the Ministry of Justice, and all the partners in the criminal justice system, to include the police, to try and move some of these cases forward, so that victims, in my view, can understand that something's being done and that can bring closure to the bereavement or whatever it is they have suffered to an end. So the Criminal Justice Board, which I attend, looks at criminal justice in Warwickshire, and we have there a number of the agencies like the Crown Prosecution Service, probation, victims organisations. We have a defence barrister, and there's quite a comprehensive, constructive discussion as to how all of those agencies can improve the situation. But COVID has been a big problem to criminal justice, and for obvious reasons. We're also joining and taking part in another regional initiative, which is about disproportionality. It's actually being chaired by the head of Crown Prosecution Service in the West Midlands, and it involves all the CJ criminal justice partners, including OPCs across the West Midlands. And we're going to look at an offender's journey and a victim's journey from the beginning to the end of the process. And if there is disproportionality there, we need to do something about it. So I don't know whether Faz will touch on that later, but that is an initiative that is ongoing. Our independent custody visitors, and for those of you who don't know, it is my job to establish and run an effective custody visitor service in our custody suites in Leamington and Nuneaton. And it has been difficult during the COVID period for us, for our volunteers to go into custody, an enclosed area, and to be socially distanced and all the rest of it. It's a huge problem for the police officers to arrest or detain anyone from the public who may or may not have COVID, etc. But it is also a difficulty for our custody visitors. But they have been using some virtual methods. They have been keeping their eye on custody and doing their duty, which is to make sure that anyone in custody, who after all hasn't been proved guilty or innocent, is treated with respect and humanely. And that is an important job that I need to make sure happens. So that is ongoing, and plainly when we get to lockdown, we'll try and up the number of visits and increase the what they can do to check on what goes on in our custody suites. Drugs and alcohol is Change, Go Live and Compass. Some of this we do jointly, commissioned with the County Council. Lots going on there. It's coming up to renew a contract, so we're going to be looking at or extend it. We're looking at how that can be improved and how we can get good value for money from those vital services right across Warwickshire. I wanted to mention the Remembrance Service for the road safety or the road victims of road collisions. This was set up by Neil. Indeed, he produced and directed a wonderful film about road safety and road collisions in Warwickshire. A particularly poignant interview with Elaine Kennell, who had lost her 19-year-old daughter and her partner to a road collision just outside Atherstone, up in the north in your patch, David. And it was very moving. And what I wanted to come out of this was a real focus on road safety into the future. We have seen a slight reduction, mainly because of lockdown in deaths. But we still get, in the last year, we had 34 people killed on the roads. We had 282 seriously injured. So nearly one a day, somebody was suffering in a major way or the worst possible way on our roads. So we put quite a lot of resource and effort into roads policing. We're working much closely with Warwickshire Fire and Rescue Service. We're working closely with West Midlands Ambulance to try and at least make sure that the response is as good as it can be to somebody who is involved in one of these awful collisions. And we've now put in about £500,000 into a number of initiatives for education. One of the reasons we had the service, we put into some money into an innovative scheme whereby we've now got a bereavement service for those that are victims. In other words, they have lost a close family member in a tragic collision on our roads. And the feedback I get from that is really good. I think if you lose a loved one, I think it's a very lonely place to be. And this bereavement help and advice has gone down really well, and is one of those grant initiatives that I've been really pleased with the feedback. Right, moving on to engagement. It has not been easy for any of us that are elected representatives to get out and about into town halls, village halls, businesses, old people's homes, all the other places I need to go and listen to what people say. It hasn't been easy. Obviously, the virtual, as we're operating on today, that has helped to at least try and keep in touch. But there's nothing like getting into a packed parish meeting with 50 people on there, and you really get the feeling of what that community thinks about any particular subject. And I'm looking forward to a return to normality, as I'm sure we all are, so we can discharge our highly valuable and important engagement responsibilities with the community. But we have been able to do quite a bit. Looking upwards, I have regular meetings with other PCCs, with our Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, where we've discussed in detail things like lockdown regulations. We've discussed finance quite a lot of policing. We've discussed the CSR, the Comprehensive Spending Review, how that's going to affect policing nationally and locally. And of course, we're always keen to see what the Home Office have got coming up in the pipeline with the expansion of the National Crime Agency. They're looking at our ROCUs, our regional organised crime units, in a lot of detail at the moment. And plainly, we need an input into that, and I do contribute to that. Locally, I'm very pleased to attend the fortnightly meetings with the chief executives and leaders of all the councils in Warwickshire, our members of Parliament, together with Public Health England, Public Health Warwickshire, to understand how the COVID pandemic is affecting Warwickshire. What are some of the statistics? What are some of the trends? What are the pressures on our hospitals and on our GPs? And how is testing going, and all those sorts of things, which all of us as elected representatives need to understand as to where we're going and how we can possibly get ourselves out of this for the benefit of everybody. My office attends all the police gold and silver, which are the strategic and tactical meetings, which take place every week. We have been briefed very well by the force as to some of the problems they've had during COVID. The current briefing this week was we have, I think it's about 8% of officers currently self-isolating for one reason or another, and we have about 7% of the staff self-isolating and away from work. But of course, they can work from home. Not so easy for a police officer to work from home. I'm told this is enough to make sure the business as usual carries on, but plainly that is an important figure to keep an eye on. You know, some forces are getting dangerously close to not being able to do all the jobs because they've got so many people isolating at home and not being able to attend work. I enjoyed going to the Nuneaton and Bedworth scrutiny panel. They raised some issues, off-road motorcycling, antisocial behaviour, county lines, knife crime, and indeed the new online reporting system. Some quite good news on that. The number of people reporting online has now doubled in the last 6 months, so we're getting a much better response on that. It's not always easy because not everybody completes the online form, so often it needs a call back to the reporter of the crime to get more information. But generally, it enables the control room to respond to non-urgent items in a more efficient way, so that the phone lines aren't continually jammed with people waiting. So that's why I've been a keen supporter of this. And I think it is our statistics for answering the phone are now pretty well within target. We're now answering the phones. I think our target is under a minute for 101. We're now 1 minute and 5 seconds this week, and it's coming down. So that's good news, and that will be, I hope, accepted by the public as being able to contact the force on 101. Joint audits and standards. Yeah, delighted to see David Carter on the meeting today as an observer, and indeed David Riley came to the audit committee and I think was interested. I think the two committees need to understand their own areas of responsibility. But I think there are certain issues which cross, we've discussed this, David, haven't we, before, which cross over, like finance and precept and other things, where you both have duties, financial duties, in monitoring me and my office. So I do think it's a positive thing to work together. I think it's a way to deconflict as well. So I don't end up answering exactly the same questions at both meetings. Both organisations are there to hold me to account. We need to be transparent to both of you, and I hope that the arrangements and the relationships that we've had have been open and honest over the years. I also went to the South Warwickshire Community Safety Partnership meeting where we talked about similar things, county lines, crime rates, online reporting, quite a lot more on rural crime. And the rural crime team celebrated its first birthday in October of this year. And I think that they are now up and running. It's split geographically into the various districts and borough areas. And there's a lot of good work going on. And I had a meeting last week with the National Farmers Union. Well, also the CLA were there, and all sorts of other agencies which have interest, Environment Agency, other interests in the rural areas. And they were all really pleased that Warwickshire had taken the initiative to set up a separate rural crime team to respond to incidents and crimes that are taking place in our rural areas. And it got doubled, as you know, this year. The team is still not big enough, but it's there and it's doing a lot of good work with our rural communities. And finally, yeah, Remembrance this year. I did manage to lay a wreath. I did it on my own I think it was on Monday morning after Remembrance Sunday. Wasn't any less poignant to me, but I think the country, did magnificently well in making sure that remembrance at our cenotaphs and war memorials continued, albeit in a totally different way. And of course, I always think of police officers as well, who were either killed during wartime or indeed in peacetime. They need remembering as well. So finally, I just want to, there's another couple of meetings I went to in Kenilworth and Rugby, which were useful, all virtual. And I'm doing my best now to attend as many meetings as I can. We're launching our consultation for the budget, which is quite difficult. We haven't had the government settlement yet. I don't have the pre-set flexibility, but we're sending out a survey. We're going out, I think it's this next week, on the views and the priorities for policing of residents in Warwickshire. And I'm looking forward to getting some response on that, which will help shape the budget that we produced to present to you. I think it's on the 1st of February. And no doubt you'll be interested in what we have to say and the levels of council tax and other things that affect your residents as well as mine on that date. So if you'll just bear with me, I'd just like to finish off with my own tribute to Neil Hewison, Mr. Chairman. I mean, he's been my chief executive and indeed was chief executive to my predecessor, Ron Ball. I mean, he put in 30 years of service as a Warwickshire police officer, retiring as a chief superintendent, and he came pretty well straight into the OPCC as he retired. He oversaw the setting up the PCC from scratch and immediately understood and promoted the role of the office. Since then, the office, I believe, has been effective in holding the chief constable and the force to account, and it has been respected throughout the county as an efficient, productive office with great influence. And we work together very closely with all our partners on such diverse topics as victims, gypsies and travellers, crime reduction, and many other items which you discuss in your panel. To me personally, he has been a great source of advice, really useful to have an ex-cop in the team. I've now got more than one, but very helpful, and understands some of those things that have gone on historically in the force. He understands the psyche of a police officer, and he has been a great help to me. We went on many journeys during the Alliance breakup to Birmingham, to Hindlip, and I have to say, difficult time for everybody. But Neil is one of those people. He can assess a situation, he can give advice straight away, and it comes from the heart. And I found that really useful on every occasion. As he said himself, he's always worked very closely with the panel. And I know that Nicola and Dave Riley, I know, would agree that we've tried to be pretty open, and we've tried to work closely with the chairs, who then can disseminate information to the members of the panel. I think we've got a much healthier structure in Warwickshire on holding to account that there are in many other PCC areas. I will say no more. But Neil is a thoughtful, respected, compassionate man. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of policing and crime, and he will be very much missed by me and everyone else. So I'd like to just finish off by wishing him and his wife Geraldine all the very best for the future, with a long, happy, healthy and peaceful retirement. He absolutely deserves it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before I open up to colleagues on the panel, can I just note your comments about the fatal and serious injury accidents across Warwickshire, and note that your contribution has been significant over the last 12 months in terms of forcing partners to come together and to look at partnership resolutions. There are still unacceptably high numbers of people killed and seriously injured on our roads, and I very much hope that you will continue to champion this into the new year. It is a fundamentally important piece of work that the office is doing, and the partners certainly are benefiting from your leadership and guidance. So I look forward to reading the next Police and Crime Plan. Right, colleagues, can I open up to any questions for the Commissioner, please? Councillor Kettle.
Good morning, Philip. As you know, it's a new step for me, but just looking back at some of the areas where we have discussed your role in the past, and that's to do with finance. You won't be surprised this be coming from me. Clearly, a lot of local authorities and public bodies have suffered hugely financially during the pandemic and still are. I'm therefore sort of slightly, well, I'm keen to know where we are in terms of funding this year and what the impact of the pandemic has been on your finances, because clearly if there have been significant additional costs, that is going to challenge your ability to deliver on some of the issues that were in your budget you put together in the 12 months ago. So it would be really helpful just to have an update on that. It may not be possible today, but if it is, that'd be great. But if we could have an update on that, and I think in your next report, I think it would be helpful if we could just have, a very brief summary, at least until the impact of the pandemic begins to dissipate, which might not be immediate, but let's hope it is. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, fair question. I mean, you won't be surprised to hear we are going through the budgeting process at the moment, and we monitor monthly progress of this year's budget as we go through. I think it's fair to say that over the last few years, Warwickshire Police has been supported by the generous level of reserves that I was left with. They haven't all gone, but they are reducing. And that is one of the reasons that about Keith Condacord's third questions is why we need to take action, because as you all know, you can only spend reserves once. Once they're gone, they're gone. So we have to produce a balanced budget. So there are some difficult decisions to take over the next couple of months. There are, yes, there have been pressures caused by the pandemic. We have been reimbursed for some costs. For example, our PPE costs have been reimbursed, but the extra overtime in monitoring some of these situations like weddings and funerals and things, the overtime budget is way overspent, because as you will understand, if there's an incident reported, the police need to attend. So there has been some overspending. I see Sarah's just come onto my screen. I don't think we can give you a full breakdown of every single item that we're considering, but I think suffice to say we're having to now look really rather more seriously this year at how to balance the budget, or as close as we possibly can. I need to say that there have been significant pressures on the budget. We've set up 42 new services having coming out of the Alliance. Of course, some of those will cost more than were being done jointly with the economies of scale. Some of them we're doing it a bit less, but I think generally they've caused pressures. We've got the big questions of information technology. We've got the big question of transactional services still to sort out. So a number of the reserves we have got are heavily earmarked for those sorts of schemes. We don't get the government grant settlement till just before Christmas. I think last year it came on Christmas Eve. Sometimes it may not come until the new year. So we are going to have to work pretty hard from January till the 1st of February to put together a budget, to consult on it, and to bring something to you for you to comment on. And who knows, you might even agree with what we say. So there's plenty of work to be done there. The other big unknown, of course, is the precept flexibility. And all local authorities, you will all know, there is a cap put on each year, and we just don't know what that will be. So, but that will have a big effect on funding as well. Sarah, do you want to come in with a few words? I see you've got your hand up. Is that all right, Chair?
Thank you. Yes, Sarah, please do. One of the things that we noted, Philip, was that your comprehensive report made no mention at all of finances. So we'd be interested to hear Sarah's update to us.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you both. Yeah, I'm more than happy to include something, or to look at including something going forward in that sort of comprehensive report to the full panel. So that's something that I'll take on board. However, as you know, Councillor Riley, we do have the finance working group. I think there was the last full meeting was in July, but we met a couple of weeks ago, just to sort of thrash out our work plan and some meeting dates a couple of weeks ago. And we do, of course, have a fuller meeting next week where we'll be looking at the Q2 monitoring report, and also I'll be able to provide you with a bit of an update on where we are with the 21-22 budget setting process. So hopefully that will be useful information, and then that can be disseminated back to the full panel as you see fit. However, you know, sadly, some of the timings of the budget working group and the full panel meetings don't always align, and that I think is going to continue to provide a bit of a challenge for us. So if we do need to refine some of those dates again, then that's certainly something that I'm happy to look at. In terms of the COVID costs, for the first 6 months of the year, the costs and the lost income to the force were in excess or around about £1 million. And as the Commissioner has outlined, that does relate mainly to PPE, it does relate to overtime, but also, as I say, to some lost income, particularly in relation to speed awareness courses. We have, however, received some reimbursement of costs. Again, as the Commissioner alluded to, we've had 112,000 of medical grade PPE reimbursed to us, and we have had £300,000 of income losses money reimbursed to us. And we have received for future costs some surge funding of 205,000. However, that still leaves a shortfall, and clearly that is being bridged by our own resources. And the Commissioner did set up an earmarked reserve of £500,000 to meet some of those COVID costs, and that's something that obviously we are keeping under close scrutiny and monitoring quite closely in terms of the usage of that. I think that's probably all I've got to say, but if you've got any other questions, I'll try and answer them.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Chris, do you have any other supplementary question to your question about finance?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you for that response. I think it would be just quite helpful. You said that you're budgeting or forecasting a shortfall for this year, and you've mentioned £1 million has been the excess cost in relation to PPE and overtime. If you roll those costs forward to the end of the year, what are you anticipating the shortfall to be? And forgive me, I haven't got the budget details in front of me from last year. What's the percentage of the overall spend that represents?
Yeah, can I come in there, Chair? Is that okay? Yeah.
Please, Sarah. Yes, please.
Yeah, the Q2 budget monitoring report is reporting that we are likely to have an increased drawdown from reserves. So we approved, the Commissioner approved in his budget in February a drawdown of almost £4 million from reserves anyway, to meet some of the transitional costs and one-off costs associated with transitioning from West Mercia, those remaining services. There will be an increased drawdown, partly in respect of those COVID-related costs that I've talked about, but other additional transitional costs that have been brought forward and that on closer inspection actually relate to revenue rather than capital. So more details on that, as I say, are due to go to the budget working group next week. It's likely to be an additional significant drawdown, probably about another £4 million. But I think that just reflects the splits now between capital and revenue, and those, you know, based on the additional information that we now have. I don't know if you want a copy of that budget report that's going to the budget working group next week, then I'm certainly happy to share that, if indeed Councillor Poole as chair would want that shared.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yes, Councillor Kettle, being new, won't be aware, but he is welcome to attend the budget working group and join in the discussions should you want. So, Chris, unless you've got any other questions specifically at this time being, I intend to move on because I am conscious of time.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question goes to Mr. Bob Malloy. Bob.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, can I go back to page 18 of the bundle, which is page 3 of your report? I did actually drop my internet connection dropped out briefly, so please stop me if you've already dealt with this. But you refer to your detective development programme, which is going to bring in 18 new investigating officers, which is good news. As you know, we've had conversations and concerns about conviction rates in the past. It's also been referred to in the HMI report. So an increase in new investigation officers sounds good. But at the same time, the Coventry Telegraph is reporting that the force is to make 80 police service inspectors redundant. Now, are those figures correct? Because if they are, that's a net loss of 62 investigators.
Right. Thank you, Bob. As usual, an incisive question. I would expect no less. Yeah, this is an ongoing process. I don't know the numbers, the exact numbers, but these are police staff investigators, many of whom are ex-cops who were drafted in because of a shortage of investigators in the police service. There is a consultation period where we're now in. Unison the union for the majority of our staff are advising members of staff, and we'll have to see how it develops. I understand the rationale behind it, albeit I didn't really come into this job to make anybody redundant. But those of you who run a business or indeed in the public sector will understand you can't spend money you haven't got. And we're at a situation where we have to make some really difficult decisions. But there's no final decision on the question you've raised, Bob. There is a consultation period going on. The force have issued quite a useful high-level response to some of the things that are being said in the media, not all of which is correct. I don't know whether Neil Hewison wishes to say any more on this matter.
Just to pick up the points that Bob's raised, we as a team are acutely aware of what's going on. We've got a series of detailed questions which we're going to pose to the Chief Constable's team next week. We need to fully understand the rationale. We need to understand how the risk associated with making these people redundant. And particularly important is we need to make sure that the people who are affected by this are being dealt with properly and are receiving the necessary support. I mean, fundamentally, it's an operational decision, but when it affects, you know, a significant number, as we believe it does, you know, we want to know where are these cuts being made, in what teams, what impact will it have, what are the risks associated with those cuts, and actually just make sure that, as I've said, people that are directly affected are receiving the support they need through this really, really difficult time for them personally. And at this stage, we haven't done our holding to account function properly yet because we haven't had a chance to put those questions to the chief, but we will do. And the consultation period, I understand the first series of consultations finish at the end of this week. So it is entirely appropriate that beginning of the next week, we pose those questions to the chief and his team.
Thank you for that. Bob, do you have any follow-up to what has been said?
If I could briefly, I mean, I appreciate the remarks about handling things in the right way and support for any staff, any officers who are affected by any changes like that. I fully understand. I'm glad to hear that. Just the concern that if there is to be a reduction in the investigation capacity, then that must be a concern, considering the past concerns about conviction rates. And the Commissioner quite rightly made the point that a lot of the existing civilian investigating officers are ex-PCs or ex-officers, so they have 30 years behind them before they take up the civilian role. Whereas if part of the way of balancing that is 18 new investigation officers straight from training, there seems to me to be the potential for not only a lack of numbers, lack of capacity in that way, but a lack of capacity in terms of experience. So I just ask, it's something which the Commissioner will keep a close eye on, because it does give me concern.
I think those are two of the, Bob, those are two of the very important questions we will be asking. And plainly, we'll keep the chair of the panel advised, David, as things develop. But it's a difficult time for the force, particularly for any one of those who is subject to consultation at the moment.
Okay, Philip, thank you for that. Bob, do you have any additional elements on that before I just tidy that discussion?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Philip, you'll remember that the panel are expressing concerns about experience levels, experience levels on the response teams, experience levels elsewhere in the organisation. That the panel have for some time been concerned about the action taken rates and the positive action taken rates around crime detection. So together with this news, recognising that it is an employment consideration for the Chief Constable, please do note our growing concern about the efficiency of the organisation in terms of the detention of suspects and the positive outcomes from any investigation that are taken from their detention, and we'll continue to move that discussion into future meetings of the performance group, which hopefully we'll be able to work with you to support your challenges that go forward in what is, I know, it's a complex environment in terms of not only the staffing issues that are at hand, but also the performance issues that are being flagged. But it's just to reiterate Bob's point and to share the concerns of the panel that we are concerned about the lack of apparent positive outcomes that are coming from the criminal justice process, from the police's contribution. Thank you for that.
I take that loud and clear, and that will be one of the very first points we raise with the Chief Constable, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Ian Davison, you have the next question.
Thank you. I've got three. One may be for later. If I may start with climate action, that you've previously said, yes, it's important and it needs doing. You're probably aware that globally we've got a climate emergency, because every time people say, oh, we perhaps will do that next year, now isn't the time to look at it. So given what the last two conversations have been about finance, I would understand but disagree if that was your response. I hope it won't be the case, because to have clear action, to have effective action against the climate emergency, it needs, first of all, plans, but it also needs finance. So I'm asking whether that will be included in your budget in February. And I would like to note that with crises, there are often opportunities as well. And you've already mentioned that a lot of staff are working well at home, and many organisations are thinking about how to do things differently. This current crisis is almost forcing a rethink. and maybe there are opportunities with a bit of investment to reorganise the police for the better, both in terms of the climate emergency, but perhaps more urgently in terms of finance in the sort of medium term. Thank you. That's my first question.
Shall I respond to that now?
Yes, please, Philip.
Yeah, not surprised, obviously, Ian, to hear you mention these topics. Yes, I mean, I think we're still trying to understand what policing will look like post-pandemic. And I think you're right. I think there are opportunities to cut down carbon emissions by perhaps cutting down the number of journeys to and from work from some parts of the organisation. Plainly, a police officer cannot sit at home and do his job. He needs to be out on the ground. I think I told you last time I'm a director of Blue Light Commercial, and one of the first procurements we're looking at is vehicles for the fleet, and we are getting quotes for electric vehicles for our fleet. And I've had some interesting comments from pursuit operators that maybe they won't be able to go as fast as they can at the moment as in a normal sort of fossil fuel driven car, but we are looking at that. I suspect we're a bit short on charging points in Warwickshire, public charging points, and I know that the force have been talking to local authorities about that. That, of course, is a financial investment, but I do think there are some things that can be done without spending too much money, encouraging cycling to work, encouraging people to use public transport, and generally, making sure that we ourselves, when there are any building works done, attention is paid to insulation and carbon emissions, etc. So I think we're doing what we can. I don't think we have the money, as you started off, to have any major expensive capital or revenue dominated schemes to introduce, but I personally think we all have a duty to look at this climate change. I supported the government's announcement yesterday, a number of initiatives, and all of us are going to have to change our way of life and the way we do things and the way we work and the way we spend our leisure time. So it's something that I'm sure will appear in the next police and crime plan, if I duly am the next police and crime commissioner. And I think a lot of thought needs to be going into what we can do as a £122 million organisation to help with climate change initiatives.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ian, do you have a follow-up on the issue of the climate change agenda?
I think not. Obviously, I'm disappointed if there's nothing in this year in the budget or plan, but I do welcome, if re-elected, the Commissioner says it will be within his next plan. So no, I don't think I have a follow-up on that. May I ask a separate question, Chair?
Yeah, Ian, I mean, just to brief the Commissioner on our discussions before, our pre-meet discussions before this meeting, and we did recognise that as a panel that we were expecting to see some acknowledgement in the budget around the climate change agenda, because we see a financial commitment as being fundamentally important to the commitment of the office, don't we? So please continue with your next question.
Thank you. The other one is obviously COVID is a current crisis, and that's already been discussed with respect to gypsies and travellers. And I listened carefully to Neil Hewison's comments about the limitations of what the police can do. But I would like your view in broad terms, in terms of policing, what you see are the current challenges for the force. And that's particularly with encouragement. I don't know if we still use the 4 E's, but in terms of encouraging good behaviour, also enforcement, and there's debate about going for fines and so on nationally. So your views on where the force are generally.
Okay, well, let's start with a couple of stats, Ian. Overall, the force has issued 372 fixed penalty notices, of which 48% have been paid. I learnt yesterday. Many other forces have much lower figures of uptake of payment, so pleased that at least we got some uptake in payment. We've issued 3 £10,000 fines in Warwickshire, which are plainly for bigger gatherings and operations to the owner or the person who's running those often social gatherings. And we've actually had a notice last week to not serve any more of those for the time being, which I'm a bit disappointed about. But apparently, if you go to court, it has to be means tested, and there are lots of ways an alleged perpetrator can wheedle out of it at the moment. So I think probably the law needs tightening a bit. So those are the stats. In my view, and from the feedback I'm getting from the public, Warwickshire Police have got the balance about right. The satisfaction in the force has gone up since the beginning of COVID, which is good to see. The 4Es are very much to the fore even now, because that just seems a common sense way to deal with it. We don't live in a police state. We police by consent of the public, and that involves, I think, talking, engaging, and those 4Es before the very last option, which is enforcement. And I'm well aware that a lot of situations have been defused by that approach, which is obviously good to hear. We're in this lockdown till the 2nd of December. You tell me what's going to happen after that. I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that the force will respond in a proportionate and reasonable way. And the feedback I've had is that Warwickshire Police have done a pretty good job of keeping the population on side, albeit enforcing or persuading our residents to conform to the rules and the regulations. But Neil was right earlier on. It's quite complex. Some things are not crimes, some are. So you can't always arrest or fine for anything that a public onlooker might think, well, that needs enforcement. It isn't always possible. So there are very good briefings, which I receive a copy of, to all officers in the force as to what they can and can't do. And they've moved pretty agilely when the law has changed. One of the problems, to be honest, is the Home Office and the College of Policing and other bodies in policing centrally haven't issued guidelines or assistance till 2 hours before the change of law comes into effect, because it all has happened so quickly. That I think they've handled pretty well. So my overall view is that the force have worked with all the other partners. They've attended when asked to nearly all incidents under this particular COVID legislation, and I say that with the confidence in the force has gone up since lockdown, and that's good news for all of us.
Okay, thank you. Ian, do you have any other issues, or are you happy?
Yes, can I just say thank you for that? That's all very positive. I would agree with your comments about clarity on national stuff, but we can't do anything about that. Earlier, you mentioned there's a big problem about officers having to isolate, and I know it's an extremely challenging job that they do, but is there anything you think they could do, the force could do further, that helps keep them safe while doing their duties?
Yeah, I mean, I think quite a lot of the isolation is as a result of a child being at a school which is closed down because there's a contact with someone who might have COVID. So it isn't, not all of those 8% of officers have the disease or have the virus. I'm not aware of any hospitalizations, for example, of officers, which is good news. It's difficult. I mean, if you're a patrol officer and your job is to be around and about patrolling in Warwickshire and attending incidents, there's not a lot you can do from home for that. But I think there are ways possibly, and of course most isolations are 14 days, so you can't really re-roll within 14 days and go back. So it is a slight problem, but I think as long as the effect of it is enables the force to do business as usual, and that officers are kept fully posted and keep in touch with their line manager and all that sort of thing, I think they're managing it quite well. But of course, you can't furlough anybody, as you know. You can't furlough a public employee. My son's been furloughed and he's currently on furlough. That can't be done. So there are limited opportunities to manage the health and well-being of staff, but there are some good support lines. Officers and staff have access to a lot of professional help during the pandemic, which I'm pleased about.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, I am conscious of time and there's still a bit to cover on the agenda, so unless anybody has any significantly pressing matters, I intend to move to the next agenda item. Okay, thank you much indeed. Colleagues, it gives me pleasure to welcome Chief Inspector Chisty to the presentation, or to do as a presentation on agenda item number 5, which is the positive action team. Chief Inspector Chisty, are you there?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you. And now, we thank you very much indeed for sharing your presentation with us before the meeting. And obviously all panel members have now read your presentation. So could I ask that when you present it to us, brevity is a key consideration, because I'm very sorry, but we were already more than halfway through the allotted time for this meeting. So what we have agreed is that, having received your presentation, we will then ask you some questions afterwards. But if I can hand the floor to you, and will you be putting your presentation on the screen?
I will do if I can. No, I can't access it.
No, you can't.
Apologies, no, sorry, I can't access it. So we'll tell you which page we're on as we're going through it.
I have it here. This is John in Democratic Services. I will share my screen.
Brilliant.
If you could, please. And Chief Inspector Chisty, like I say, please don't think me rude, but if we could keep tight to time, that would be very helpful for us.
Okay, well, I'll do my level best. Please do keep it to time. So thank you for the invite here today. I'm joined by Sergeant Kate Wallace, and we're going to do a co-presentation. And the reason for that is because not only did Kate join this agenda with me right at the very beginning, but in recent weeks I've now moved on to another role. So Kate is the continuity in this agenda and is moving forward with some of the work that's coming over the horizon. So if we could move to the next slide, please, which is setting the scene. So I shall very quickly summarise this. Policing Vision 2025 sets out a clear ambition for all police forces up and down in the country to have a representative workforce. That ambition is also supported and shared in our current police and crime plan, and I know the Commissioner and the Chief are also very keen to ensure that Warwickshire Police is fully reflective of the communities that we serve. When we looked across our workforce representation, what the data really highlighted to us was that our biggest underrepresentation in terms of police officers came from within our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And it'll be no surprise that position was reflected nationally. So when we looked across the country, it was exactly the same underrepresentation in all forces. So as a consequence, the Chief and the organisation decided to have a dedicated positive action team to start making some traction and moving forward with this agenda. And that was established, being led by myself, back in November 2019. So moving to the next slide. So we've been on a journey. We're now 12 months into that journey. So right at the very, very beginning, we needed to be really clear what we were hoping to achieve, and we were keen to take an evidence-based approach. And when you look across the 9 areas of protected characteristics under the Equality Act, it's really clear that there is no hierarchy. So race and ethnicity is not more important than disability or gender. So our thought processes were really clear that we wanted to embrace and take an evidence-based approach. So these were some of the objectives that we set out for us as a team. So we had a really, really clear focus, but really understanding that we were on the start of a journey, and we know that looking at good practice nationally, this takes many, many years to really build and drive change. So just as a pause, really, these were some of our objectives, and I won't go through them. I'm just conscious of our time today. But clearly, our primary objection for the first phase of this work was to really target the underrepresentation coming from our Black, Asian, minority communities to ensure that we get an increase in representation. So I shall move on to the next slide, please, slide number 4. So what was really important and really clear that actually we needed to do some community engagement, because we are a public service, the police are the public and the public are the police. So we set out really strongly to set out and work with our local communities. And very, very early on in the journey, we established some really strong, supportive community advocates from across Warwickshire. And that was really key, because we knew where we wanted to make a difference, but we knew that we had to win hearts and minds, and we needed to get people on board. So looking across our processes, we developed opportunities for candidates and interested persons and parties to register interest, because that was a gap for us, because during this time our services are hosted by colleagues in West Mercia. So we made sure there was opportunities for people who had an interest in policing to actually register, and they would then get follow-up contact from myself and the team to start brokering that interest, developing it and making it happen. When we looked across our recruitment processes, one of the first things that we wanted to do was to actually try and build in some further transparency. And it gives me great pleasure and pride to say that actually we were one of the first forces in the country to introduce independent community member panels to our final interviews. And what that's allowed us to do is to bring independence and difference onto our final interview stages. And what we've learned from that is, one, it gives us the ability to have diversity on the panel. We've got independence, but also our community members are helping us to develop and build our service. And that takes a really strong place with them, because the reach that has and the feedback that we've had both internally and externally, that's a really positive step, because we're starting to build that confidence and that courage, which doesn't always exist amongst our communities, especially when there might not be an appetite to join the service. We wanted to communicate across our community, so we devised a regular newsletter just to sort of set out what we were doing, because I was really keen, as was the team, that actually we didn't have all the answers. We know what we wanted to do, and we wanted to make sure that we were setting out this information. We delivered a number of presentations and messaging to faith-based organisations, again starting to build momentum, which included the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, the Sikh Community Centre, the Nuneaton Muslim Women's Group, the Sikh Assembly, and engaging with the Warwickshire Race Equality Partnership as a starter. We also developed some really good and strong links, not only within Warwickshire, with some of our schools and colleges. We saw the team started to deliver inputs at public services course, starting to build interest, and with local schools. But also we reached out to the local universities, where at Coventry University we were also delivering inputs, hosting surgeries, and we were also working with Warwick University also. Again, it was about trying to extend that reach and build the interest within policing. We were working and have managed to develop a blue light collaboration, so wanted to do some joint working across the blue light services, and we've enjoyed some really good working with certain fire service, who are also looking to increase their workforce representation. Partner representation, you know, we've worked across with many partners through our CSPs, our colleagues in the districts and boroughs, because from my perspective, from our perspective, this was and still remains very much a front-facing agenda, where we need the partnership support, because this is Warwickshire Communities Police Service, and we want to build it together. We developed a number of branded promotional material, because we wanted to make sure that Warwickshire stands out as a unique brand, and people understand that when people think about policing, and when we talk about Warwickshire, that there is actually 43 forces that exist, but what we were keen to do was to promote and highlight Warwickshire as its own brand, which has been successful. So I'm now going to hand over to Kate. So we're now going to go on to slide number 5. She'll talk a little bit about some of the candidate engagement we've done.
Thank you, Kate. Before you start, can I just remind you that the panel have read the slides, so brevity would be appreciated, and then we'll talk about the key issues with you when you finish your presentation.
Certainly.
Okay, what we found was the candidate engagement has been really key to making sure people want to continue on the journey with Warwickshire Police. So a lot of our efforts have gone into supporting candidates, the positive action strategy of providing candidate workshops, so they fully appreciate the application process and seeing them through to the various stages. We've encouraged peer support as well via WhatsApp. We're looking to bring those that are now reaching those pre-employment checks phases. We want to take some of our positive action champions who currently work for us and buddy them up with the candidates so that they've got a friend they can link in with, just to touch base as they prepare to actually commence their careers. Lots of workshops for interview preparation, the assessment centre as well, and that has really shown how key it has been to keep people in the process and want to join Warwickshire. Next slide.
Okay, so just coming back to myself in terms of communications and marketing, as Kate said, we devised a strategy which was first for the force, setting out our vision and the journey ahead. To raise awareness both internally, because obviously this is a whole organisational responsibility. There are a number of briefings done across the organisation to teams and departments. We developed a number of champions across the organisation, because we know, although we've started with a particular underrepresented group, we know the agenda is broader, and if we could collectively build momentum across all ranges of diversity, that would be ideal. So that was a thought process by actually going out across the organisation. We did direct engagement with our Black and Asian minority ethnic police officers and staff, because clearly they have reach into their friends, their families, and wider networks. We've developed an intranet site and pages, which were all things that we felt needed to be done in order to get the message out and to provide that support. Unending support from our chief officer, from the chief and other chief officers in terms of reinforcing the message, our ambition, and to mobilise the workforce to ensure that we focus. We did a targeted marketing campaign. We saw 7,500 leaflets dropped across Warwickshire in the key communities, which was again something that was never done in history, and we used some really niche marketing solutions, which included Facebook and Instagram and Spotify, again to continue to get the message out, because it's a continued banging of the drum to make sure that people understand that we offer great opportunities within the force, and we were really keen and are still keen for people to come and join us. However, as we can all appreciate, it's been this doesn't come without its challenges. The agenda, COVID's been mentioned this morning. That's brought us immense challenges, because we've been unable to play out some of our ambition to have people together in rooms across the county. So we've had to do a lot of our engagement remotely, which is challenging because it's not as personal and doesn't give people the opportunity to have that one-to-one interaction. The death of George Floyd, clearly that had and still has some impact on policing nationally, but also in Warwickshire in terms of confidence amongst some of our communities, heightening concerns around racial tensions and the perceptions of policing, which are some of the things that we, through our engagement, were really keen to eradicate and actually dissipate some of the things that exist, because from engaging with communities, some of the preconceptions differ from community to community. So one of the things that we were really keen to do for our engagement was just to allow people to talk and really understand what it's like to work in policing, coming from an underrepresented group. So these are some of the challenges that we've encountered. Something that we found was challenging is that actually there's not a national entry requirement. It differs from force to force. We are a small force, and I put limited opportunities. We've had 3 cohorts during the last year, 3 cohorts next year. And when we are neighbouring West Midlands, who are recruiting in the region of, hundreds, 200 to 300 officers per month, it makes our journey harder and challenging, because we want to keep people, good candidates here, as opposed to them going over to other forces. And it is a lengthy process. It can take anything between 6 and 9 months to start from an expression of interest to actually landing in the organisation. And we've looked and we've revised some of our processes to bring it down so we can be more swift in the recruitment process. And when we started, current degree holders were ineligible to apply for the police constable degree apprenticeship. And actually, we've had some success in that, and we've managed to get that changed. So just to share some of the results, which I'm going to hand over to Kate to do, please.
Early indications show that the positive action work, the concerted effort, has brought more interest from our underrepresented communities to Warwickshire Police. We've had 4 times the number of candidates shortlisted from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities than ever before. And at present, we have 11 candidates who are finishing the final stages. So hopefully we will see most, if not all, of those 11 joining us during 2021. We've also seen significant success with our female candidates as well. Whilst there's not the same level of underrepresentation, they are clearly a focus for us as a protected characteristic. Do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just.
And yeah, way forward really. 2021.
So just coming to slide number 10, Kate, if you just want to talk through that.
Yeah, although current recruitment is closed, we're looking ahead to those we're going to be trying to recruit for 2021, joining us in 2022. And it's also pertinent that there's been a recent COPS debate on Twitter, including Kit Malthouse MP, the policing minister, and just about every recommendation they came up with during the debate on how to increase representation and attraction, Warwickshire has already started on those pieces of work. So we're really gratified to know we are heading in the right direction. We will continue to provide that one-to-one support for candidates from all backgrounds, but particularly marketing towards our underrepresented groups. And we are looking to positive action becoming mainstreamed into all the lines of business so that it becomes business as usual by the end of next year.
Okay, so that kind of takes us through a whistle-stop tour of the presentation. So just conscious of time, Chair, so we'll take any questions. Sorry, you're on mute. Okay.
Chief Inspector, thank you for that very concise summary, and my apologies for putting pressure on you both after you've done so much preparation, but I feel that you've adequately, or in fact well, demonstrated the complexity of the agenda. So what I'm going to do now is throw it open to my colleagues to see if anybody has a question for you, and I have a couple for you before we finish.
Okay.
Oh. Was I on mute all the time then?
You're on mute, yeah.
I was saying thank you for that concise presentation, and my apologies for putting pressure on you to keep it short. I've just used all that time up now by being on mute. I'm going to throw you open to colleagues for questions, and I have a couple myself. So many congratulations on what you've done now. Let's do a bit of a deeper dive. Colleagues, and let's start with Andy Davis.
Yeah, thank you. Great initiative, and thanks for the presentation. It was really helpful. I just got a question about leadership development as well. So having got candidates through the door, are you now developing pathways so that people can, you can nurture staff within the organisation so that your leadership teams, leaders, boards, they all become more representative of the communities that we serve as well? So it's not just getting recruits through the door, it's actually that leadership role as well.
Yes, I can confirm we have recognised the fact that there's no point doing all this work, getting talented people into our organisation if we don't do everything we can to retain them and to help them develop their careers. So we have a programme of work at the moment focusing on police officers, I have to admit, with regards to career development, promotion, not just upwards through the ranks, but also sideways into specialist areas. And we just started working with candidates who are looking for promotion to inspector. We've just done a series of workshops. We're looking to develop a similar programme for those looking for sergeant promotion in the new year. We have done a lot of work with candidates who are interested in the fast track promotion development scheme. So that's PC to inspector over a 2-year programme, specifically marketed through our staff networks to encourage the applications and interest from our underrepresented groups. And there is also a plan to develop some study support for those looking to sit their exams, not just for promotion, but also the National Inspector's exams for next year.
Just in addition to that, there are a number of mentors and coaches that people have access to. And as Kate has said, the encouragement is being driven not only through the positive action team, but through the support staff networks to actually build that courage, build that confidence, so people can step forward in order to take on some of those leadership roles, whether it's promotion or specialisms.
Okay, thanks.
And did you have a follow-up on that? Or
no, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of other colleagues waiting to ask questions, but can I just pick up on Andy's point and ask about exit interviews? And have you reviewed the effectiveness of the exit interview system that you're doing for those candidates that are leaving the organisation? Because one of the reasons we're to see you here today is that we noted a very proportionally high exit rate of police staff from Warwickshire Police, particularly during this year, and the panel were concerned about the volumes of people we perceived to be leaving from a BME background.
Okay, I'm going to take that one as well. Earlier this year, the force reviewed its exit interview process, and a new questionnaire was developed. The decision was made to remove the first line manager as part of that exit interview process, and to make it a second line manager or a senior leader. And the reason for that is to try and encourage a more open and honest review as to why they're leaving. With regard to police officer leavers this year, from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, we've only had one leaver very early on in their training, and that has been thoroughly reviewed, and a number of learning opportunities have been taken from that. I've linked in with the learning development team, and we're looking at how we can make sure that new candidates, new student officers who come into us are better informed and prepared. So we are learning from the experiences. With regards to the police staff, I'm not aware of the analysis that has been undertaken with regards to police staff leavers, but I'm now working as part of the HR team, so I've got much more access to my colleagues who work in that area of business.
Okay.
Just to kind of add to that, you know, I chair our BME network, which is a representation for the Black, Asian, minority police officers and staff in the force. And what we try and encourage through that is the opportunity for people to come and speak in a safe space if there are any issues or concerns. As you can imagine, some of the exit interview information is confidential. So some of the things that we try to close the circle on is early identification. And actually, we need to get the agreement of the individual concerned who's leaving to say, well, actually, can they have a conversation with a trusted colleague from the network? Can we turn this round? And that's kind of some of the thinking that we've tried to employ in general within our HR teams. But ultimately, we are almost governed by the individual and their wishes.
Totally, I can fully appreciate that, and I take some confidence from the fact that you're reviewing and you're learning as you're moving forward. And can we just park that issue with you for further consideration about the volume of police staff leavers from the organisation? Bob Malloy, you had your hand up and you've taken your hand down. Is that because I've inadvertently addressed your question? Bob, can't hear anything from you. Chris Kettle.
Thank you. I mean, that's a great success story, and everything that you've put through is clearly to be highly commended. What you're doing is you're bringing in people who you would not otherwise have attracted from where you were 6 months ago or whenever the process started. But have you looked at, what the initial causes were? Have you had those conversations with people to turn around and say, yes, positive action has worked, but had it not been there, why would you not have applied for a role with Warwickshire Police? Because clearly the fact they want to join demonstrates that they have all the right aspirations to join the police, but there was something that was discouraging them. And that is something, how you're addressing whatever that issue was, because that's the legacy issue behind it. And that I think is something that should be really helpful to understand.
Okay. I said earlier in the presentation that certainly my experience that the misnomers and perceptions that exist in communities differ from each community to other communities. So, for example, when you go and speak to Asian communities, and I can speak because I come from those communities, the status around policing doesn't always exist. So, people have the mindset that the policing is corrupt because they draw the parallel to India and Pakistan. So the last thing they do is want to encourage their children to do it. So it's got no real status attached. Other preconceptions, actually, when you join from those communities, there are no chances of progression. And that's a real issue. When you speak to black communities, there is this perception that we stop and search our black communities, more disproportionately use force. And, some of the challenges I flagged earlier was that the lack of opportunity to have that face-to-face personal interaction, and also to be able to dispel some of those myths. Policing offers great opportunities. It's a challenging and rewarding role. We have a responsibility as an organisation to work with those communities to dispel those myths. And it is a challenging place to be when you come from a minority ethnic community, because not only can you face backlash from the community that you come from and police for joining the organisation, but also you have to settle in the organisation and understand policing, because policing isn't easy. So we have a responsibility to be visible to those communities to ensure that the interest is there and we get the best talent. And I think it's an operational imperative, because that way we can really target the threat, harm and risk that exists amongst our communities. So those, I think, in my view and my assessment, why we have those issues and why we still need to do more to be able to ensure that we are representative.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Colleagues, does anybody else have any questions before I thank the officers? No? Okay. Chief Inspector Chisty, Sergeant Wallace, thank you very much indeed. We wish you good luck with the work you're doing, and clearly, having read your slides, we fully understand the time and the effort and the skill that you're bringing to this, and we wish you luck. Without doubt, the panel 100% supports, as I know the PCC does, your ambition to make sure that the organisation properly represents the communities it represents. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, can I now take you back to the main agenda items, and we move to agenda item number 4, which is the appointment of an independent member to the Police and Crime Panel. Deb, are you going to talk through this?
Thank you, Chair. As you know, there was a recruitment drive earlier in the year for a new independent member to take on the role following the departure of Mr. Bob Malloy. The selection panel met early in October, and they are recommending the appointment of Mr. Andrew Davis.
Okay, thank you, Deb. Colleagues, there is a recommendation on this report, and that recommendation is that the panel votes and supports, or otherwise, the appointment of Mr. Andrew Davis as the new independent member. Before I move to a vote, can I just say that my thanks to to those members who joined me on the panel. We did do a very robust set of questions, and without doubt, Mr. Andrew Davis came out as the preferred candidate out of all of the candidates, having done a very good interview with us. He brings a professional background both in criminal justice and in private business, which we feel are going to be really good skills to complement this panel moving forward. So colleagues, can I take a vote, please, on all those in favour of appointing Mr. Davis as the new independent member of the Police and Crime Panel? Can you please vote either by raising your electronic hands, or if you're unable to do that, by waving at the screen, and I'll ask Deb to come back with a count. So Deb, have you been able to look at the votes?
We've got 7 raised hands, Chair.
Okay, Deb. So that's excellent.
I've just got some more coming up. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8.
8. Okay, then, and recognising the challenges of operating this system, would it be appropriate, Deb, to take that as a unanimous agreement as we sit here and move forward?
You may want to ask the panel if there is anybody that dissents.
Okay, colleagues, does anybody have a hand to raise who does not agree with the appointment of Mr. Andrew Davis to the panel? There you go. Oh, the joys of technology. So I cannot see on my screen any objections. Deb, do you agree with that?
Yeah, there are no objections registering on the screen.
Okay, then. Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Andrew Davis to the panel for a 4-year term that will start on the 6th of December 2020. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome, Andrew. Right.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, and we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting on the 1st of February, or if not before, on the working groups. And you and I, Deb will arrange for you and I to sit down and have an introductory discussion, part of which will be allocating some working groups to you. All right, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, everybody.
Right, and if by well-ordered agenda, we now come down to the discussion about the refresh of our panel working groups. We did discuss this in the pre-meet. Does anybody have any observations or discussions they want to make now? The action arising from the pre-meet was that Deb and myself would organise representation. No, thank you very much indeed. That takes us to agenda item number 6. Again, we discussed this in the pre-meet. Colleagues, does anybody have an observation that they would like to make, or a suggestion they would like to make about the work programme going forward? Andy Davis?
Yeah, just one suggestion really, which actually comes from the discussions that we've been having this morning about gypsies and travellers. So it cropped up on a number of occasions, and just recognising the Police and Crime Commissioners convening of the roundtable event in October 2016 now, so quite a while ago, and the protocol that was signed then. So whether there's a role for the panel to consider how that protocol has evolved, and whether there are any other relevant issues for the panel to pick up as part of a discussion around gypsies and travellers.
Okay, so Philip, when we were talking in the pre-meet, we recognised that 3.5 years ago you held a public partnership forum on the issue of gypsies and travellers, and as you know, there is a lot of concern amongst members of our Warwickshire community about how partners are coming together to support this community. So would you have any observations if we chose to put gypsy and travellers as a future work agenda on our work plan?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, David. perhaps focusing on the role that we take rather than holding all sorts of other partners and agencies to account. But I think it would be useful. And Chris Lewis in my office, who runs it, I'm sure could give us an update on how he feels that it's going and whether it needs to be reviewed or strengthened in any way. So I think that would be positive.
Okay, thank you. And yes, we totally take your point about that review focusing on the PCC's office and the leadership the PCC's office has provided and hopefully will provide going forward. I've got Ian Davison and I've also got Peter Gilbert. Ian Davison.
Thank you. I'm sure the Warwickshire Police don't want any more reorganisations, but as you're well aware, that there's a lot of talk about local government reorganisation. I'm not asking you about your view or preferences on what model happens if it does, but the question is, of course, if there does end up as unitary authorities, that there are two, a north and south in Warwickshire, it's what implications, if any, that has for your office and the fire and crime and police service for Warwickshire. Now, that was the question, not really to be taken now, but it's whether that's, it's when that should be looked at. Obviously, you don't want to wait until it's happened. Then there maybe needs to be planning and consideration of what to do if that eventuality happens.
I think that's a fair comment. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Warwickshire is, as you probably all know, is one of the smallest forces in the country. I don't believe it could be split down the middle, so to speak. I'm keen to see Warwickshire Police as an entity continue and to work with the Fire and Rescue Service, which is an entity in Warwickshire. We have the West Midlands Regional Ambulance, but I think we'll have to react, and I'm sure we will be consultees on anything that may or may not change. And clearly, my focus would be to make sure that all of our residents, whether they're north, south, or the middle of Warwickshire, continue to get a good service, and the structure of it needs to reflect that.
Thank you, Philip. So if you're in agreement, what we will do is ask Deb to think through how we can place the unitary debate onto our agenda, because we are obviously aware that there are services that your office buy from Warwickshire County Council, which would clearly have to be reviewed should we not go to a single unitary status. So so if you're happy, Philip, we'll put that onto a discussion for Deb to have to work out how we take this debate forward to 2023.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the timing on any of this. Are you aware of it? It's been floated. We need to consider the options. I do accept that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of timing, the panel is aware that we're expecting the devolution white paper in the spring, and we're aware that discussions between the principal authorities have talked about 2023 being a target date. So it's an emerging issue, as you quite rightly say. Peter Gilbert.
Thank you, Chair. My camera's playing up, so your benefit there is my poor technology. But just to associate myself with what the Commissioner's just said, and to put on record that we cannot have a split police force. It needs to stay as one Warwickshire, and so does the fire brigade need to stay as one. But whether or not we have a north-south divide politically is for a further discussion, but certainly the two forces need to stay as one. Just on what Andy Davis said about the Gypsy Traveller and having people come on, it was Andy, wasn't it? My cameras are playing up. I think we ought to hear from the liaison officer that the Commissioner has, and also I think this panel needs to hear from the liaison officer the police have in relation to Gypsy Travellers as well. I don't believe I've heard from either. I've heard from them in other meetings, but I don't believe I've heard them at this panel. And I think it would be useful to see them and hear what they have to say and how they operate. And what their sort of benefit is to the communities that they're working with and liaising with. So that would be something I would hope would be with that suggestion that Andy's made.
Yeah, I'd be very happy for that, Chair. And obviously you can put it into your programme possibly following the budget, I would rather than at the next meeting, sometime early next year, I think would be perfectly reasonable for us to come along and answer questions.
Chair,
Okay.
could we not? Would that not be a non-controversial topic for an April agenda? I might not be here in May.
I think, Chair, we would have to wait and see what the political issues were in the various campaigns at that time.
Well, let's tidy this up, and again, we'll ask Deb to pick that up, and obviously considering the April agenda, see how we can do it without stepping into any of the pre-election issues.
But may I just add, Chair, that if I'm not here when you do discuss those topics, I'm more than happy to come as a well-experienced resident on these issues, and more than happy to come and speak candidly without trying to walk two paths at once.
Councillor Gilbert, you will always be welcome, whether you're on the panel or not. You bring sunshine to our meetings, and how could we not enjoy that? Right.
I wish only if you meant it.
Andy Davis, you've still got your hand up.
Sorry, it's a legacy hand.
My favourite expression during lockdown, legacy hands. I like that.
Okay, members, does anybody else have any comment on the work programme? No, thank you very much indeed. That takes us to dates of next meeting. Philip, we discussed it in the pre-meet. We're just looking at that meeting on the 1st of April. We are cognizant that the elections hopefully will go ahead in May, and we're just trying to work out the best timetabling of our full panel meetings to accommodate what's proving to be an interesting period. So, Deb,
if that clashes with a purdah or whatever, I'd be happy to come if you rearrange, in March maybe, if that is what you want.
Yeah, let's ask Deb to liaise with your office and come up with some appropriate dates that are advised by Jane to make sure we all can behave lawfully. Okay, colleagues, that takes us to agenda item number 8. You'll have to excuse me because I'm looking at a set of papers that don't appear to have 8 on them. Any urgent items? There you go. My apologies. Colleagues, does anybody have any urgent items for this meeting? No, I can't. So that takes us to agenda item number 9, which is where we move into confidential business. And Andy Davis, confidential business is where we ask members of the public to leave the meeting. So thank you for your attendance. You're not yet formally a panel member, so we'll be asking you to leave, and then we'll welcome you at the next meeting. Is that right, Jane?
Sorry, yes, that's correct, Chair. We also need to wait for the live feed to cease as well.
All right, so before we do, Andy, is there anything that you'd like to say as a parting shot from your first unofficial meeting?
No, very impressed, very informative. As was said before, I work for Shell. I'm a trustee of Relate, and I'm a magistrate, so hopefully I can add some value at some point in the future. I enjoyed the robust interview process, Dave and Andy. So you've got me ready for the the fun and games. So thanks very much, everybody, and I wish you all a good day.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
I will now move to reading the